welcome back to another episode of the Set at Home Mom, and I want to talk about the book Educated by Tara Westover, and it kind of be more from a perspective as a homeschooling parent. So this was the last book I read for 2019, and it was the best book that I read for 2019. So I definitely think it's one of those books that everyone should read, and especially homeschooling families would benefit from reading it as just kind of a good self-check to make sure you're not finding yourself on kind of the extreme end of raising and homeschooling your children. So if you're not familiar with her story, she grew up in a Mormon survivalist family. They are part of the LDS faith, but even then I don't think they represent your typical Mormons in a lot of ways. So very, 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 very religious, and also very like the mindset that the world is going to end and we're going to be the only ones surviving and we got to be prepared and all this stuff. And those things individually are not necessarily bad or wrong, but kind of when you like build your whole life around it and you kind of just like take this extreme view that it is going to happen and we need to abandon all other things in society just to survive for something that you don't know when it's going to happen. She just kind of describes her dad as probably being bipolar or schizophrenic, but we don't know for sure on that. Her dad was like, she would kind of describe him as like kind of talking about, you know, the government schools being full of Marxist and socialist and communist and so on and so on, and having no distrust of the government or any other large agencies, including hospitals. And like even when the kids get hurt, like severely injured, like they won't even take them to the hospital, they'll treat it at home. She kind of almost probably would describe like your worst stereotype of a homeschooler. Like I think that when some people think about how bad homeschooling is, like she would almost fit like the whole reason you shouldn't homeschool your children kind of thing. But she's such a minority of people that would consider some homeschoolers. But the thing is that she really wasn't homeschooled, and she even goes on to talk about how her one of her brothers and his wife are actually really homeschooling their children and making sure they get an education. She was not homeschooled really, because there was no like day-to-day formal thing going on where one of the parents is sitting down teaching them this in a formal manner, other than learning how to read so that she can read the scriptures, the Book of Mormon, and other doctrines and things like that. For the most part, she was just, I mean, it's almost like it's like this unschooled, self-directed education, but even then it's really not that how that's supposed to go. Homeschooling or unschooling and self-directed education is more where the parents are setting up certain things in order for the child to pursue interest of theirs in what they want to learn. In this case, that's not what was really going on. Like, it was, she would get up and then like she'd have to help her mom in the kitchen making things, including essential oils and stuff like that and herbs, or a lot of times helping her dad out in the junkyard doing things. And in a lot of cases like this was pretty dangerous, and when some of the kids would be severely injured where they should have gone to the hospital, they wouldn't because they were just so afraid that the government was going to take their kids away. And CPS probably would have been called for negligence at that point. I'm sure that would have happened, so that was kind of probably a legitimate fear by then. He seemed to, a lot of his fears were based on the incident at Ruby Ridge, and we know that was really, really bad and very wrong on what the government did to those people, murdered them. So she kind of had this thought that was because they were homeschooling, when it's, you know, it was a little bit more to it than that. She does make it to college when she's 17 by passing the ACT and having one of her older brothers that did go to school help her get through, but she was still really behind and really, really struggled to do everything and to learn, because she really had to teach herself every single thing, and she didn't even know how to study, or just simply be told, like, the whole point of the textbooks is to read it so you can pass the test and know the content, and didn't even know what the Holocaust was. She didn't know that she was lacking in a lot of those basic social skills, and you're just your worst stereotype of what you would think. But she proves that she is capable to educate herself by eventually getting a PhD from Cambridge. So that's pretty awesome, and I think she probably has a really high level of intelligence as well, and just that, like, strong motivation to learn. And you have public schoolers that aren't even that motivated. I mean, most people just aren't probably that motivated. I think even when I was in college, like, I wanted to pass. I didn't really care about making straight A's, and I didn't have to maintain a certain scholarship for that kind of stuff. So, like, she kind of even was overall very fearful of governments and hospitals and kind of things like that. And I think it's okay to have a healthy skepticism of things. I don't fully trust the medical establishment myself, but I'm not to the point to where, like, if there was an emergency, that I wouldn't go and put my life in their hands. Like, there's enough trust, but there are plenty of things that I'm skeptical on and I'm hesitant on myself. And even with, like, government schools, like, like, there are homeschoolers that are so, like, hardcore, this is brainwashing, this is indoctrination, we're poisoning our children's minds from these socialist and communist, and it's kind of one of those extreme views, and yes, those things are going on. There is indoctrination going on in the public schools. I know when I reflect back on my education, like, I could see a little bit of it, and I definitely know, like, I saw it firsthand when I was teaching. So yes, that does happen, but it's not like this extreme. It's not like extreme obvious, like, we're trying to incorporate all this, like, communism into kids' minds. Like, it's just not that extreme, at least in probably most public schools. Not saying that they're great, but it's kind of a good check on when you read her describing her thoughts on so many things and why she thought that way. It was because she was almost to the point where she was probably a little indoctrinated herself without really seeing the whole view of everything. Like, it seems like she didn't get a whole picture of everything, or different views on something. And I think as homeschooling parents, we need to sometimes be willing to present our kids with different views, especially sometimes when it comes to history. If we're teaching about the Civil War, reading primary sources from Confederate soldiers, from Union soldiers, from slave owners, non-slave owners, from slaves, and you can probably get a better, robust understanding of history when you're exposed to different points of view. And you kind of don't realize, you probably would come to the point that you realize, like, one side isn't totally evil and one side is not totally, like, good. I mean, there's truth there, and you want to get to the truth, but you sometimes have to make an informed opinion based on what you were there. And she kind of talks about that in some of her interviews, since she wrote the book. And when talking about, like, some of her social stuff, like, she said she didn't even think about, like, washing your hands or taking frequent showers and things like that. And when I say washing your hands, like, I mean, like, after going to the bathroom, because she goes, I don't pee on my hands. And she had roommates that just, like, kind of she was weird. She was this weird homeschooling kid, and but her parents didn't take her to co-ops or put her into social situations and things like that. And as parents of homeschooling, as homeschoolers, like, we need to be very diligent, that we're putting, most homeschoolers put their kids in co-ops. They are sitting down almost every day for an hour or two teaching their kids the things that they need to know until they reach the point to where that they can probably be more motivated and self-directed in what they're going to learn. She experienced some abuse from an older brother, and there was, like, think some spiritual abuse, I would say, going on as well. Even though they were Mormons, and I don't consider them Christians, because it's big theological differences there. But I want to be like, I don't think all Mormons are obviously like that family. And there are just Christians that are kind of extreme fundamentalist, religious, like that too. So there can be extremes really anywhere. So, and I think it's good probably not to try to teach our kids to be fearful of everything and the outside world like they were kind of taught. And I try not to bash public schools too much. Like, I am definitely not a fan of public schools, and you're not going to hear me singing their praises, but I'm not going to sit there and bash it or create such this mentality that my kids just are so afraid of public schools and things like that. And it's just a good check. And I have yet to meet an adult homeschooler that was so socially awkward that they could not have a decent conversation or have a career. I recently just was at a New Year's party, and I met some people around my age that had been homeschooled, and they have pretty successful lives and families and are not socially awkward by any means. So yeah, if you've read this book, leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about the book. If you're a homeschooling family and you haven't read it yet, please do so. It's great, and it's just kind of makes you feel good that maybe you're doing a much better job than some people when doing the right thing, and it just is a good check to make sure you're not going and finding yourself on the extreme end of things. So, leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe.